Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok are sites that more than likely come to mind when anyone mentions the topic of social media. Surely there are plenty of other sites that can fit the concept, but these examples will suffice. With the advent of social media, it has facilitated communication between people at an unprecedented level. People can communicate with one another regardless of their respective time zones and geographical areas. As long as they have an internet connection, they are free to share information. This revolutionary technology, in addition to communication, allows events taking place in another part of the world to be witnessed by others who were not physically present in real time. It is evident in social media's humble beginnings that it was praised for its ease of access and communication, a net benefit to society because it could connect people in ways that were not possible in the past. This ease of connectedness is especially pertinent nowadays as countries grapple with the lockdowns and social isolation due to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, even with this unprecedented ability to connect people and share information, social media has not come without its downsides. The less desirable consequences of social media usage has brought about a way for people to pursue their validation fixes. In a fast-paced takeout world where people seek instant gratification in any form, social media has only fueled that need and given it a tangible platform to manifest itself. The questions that will be examined here are these. Has social media turned people into narcissists? Also, has social media normalized self-exaltation? And is the opposite true, that social media has granted narcissists an easy way to further their need for self-promotion? Let us begin. In examining the first question, it is not too great a stretch to assert that social media in its current form provides a heavy temptation for self-promotion, specifically to promote what is perceived by an individual to be the best dimensions of themselves, while simultaneously downplaying the negatives. In answering the first question of whether social media creates narcissists, we need to define what we mean by narcissism and how it manifests itself. A few studies have taken a look at this question, as well as those related to it in some form. They would use data to quantify behavior and decide that certain tendencies point more towards narcissism than others. Many people use social media, and not all of them are narcissists. It would be absurd to make such a blatant generalization, but the problem of including all behaviors or making the definition for the analysis too broad is that most, if not all users of social media would get caught up in the conclusion. This would be akin to capturing a large number of fish in a gigantic net, when we only wanted to hone in on a small number of fish. To solve this problem, the fish metaphor, and the one we are interested in, social media users and narcissism, we have to shorten the size of the net, or in this case, limit the scope of the definitions. The definition for narcissism that we will use here is one of a person who maintains a highly egotistical sense of self, while simultaneously downplaying or eliminating any perceived faults. Additionally, this person often will go to extreme lengths to maintain this image, as well as promote themselves in any way they can. To quantify the narcissism and social media relationship, the studies that have examined the present question have laid out criteria including online behaviors, like time spent online, number of photos or selfies posted, number of friends, and so on. What was interesting in one of these studies, McCain et al., was that the time spent online was not an indicator of narcissism. A very weak correlation existed between those two variables. However, the three variables that had the strongest relationship to narcissism were the number of status updates, number of friends, and the number of photos or selfies posted. In other words, there was a positive correlation or relationship between narcissistic behavior and the three aforementioned variables. If these findings are indeed reliable, the logic behind them would sound something like this. If a person tends to be more egotistical and desires as much self-promotion as possible, they would tend to post more photos, provide more status updates, and attempt to make increased friends or followers. These actions would be done for the sole purpose of satisfying the ever-present need for validation, for others to be interested in them. It is not hard to accept this realization, and we likely know of, or have known a person who would fit this description. As such, the conclusion that people who already possess narcissistic traits use it to satisfy their needs and desires is rather evident. This very same study concluded that people who are narcissists are very much drawn to platforms like Facebook to express their egotism, meaning the relationship between narcissism and social media use appears to be the other way around. Narcissism drives increased social media use and not vice versa in those cases. Even so, we have to examine whether social media itself is manipulating behavior in such a way that it almost normalizes narcissism. That is where we proceed next. It has been aforementioned that not everyone who uses social media does so for narcissistic purposes, or rather, not in the ways that most people would think. Ultimately though, it must also be said that people who upload photos as well as status updates do so for varying degrees of validation. Even if it is to share important life events, the question can be asked, well, why are you doing it? Why are you sharing this picture with your followers or friends? And the answer is something that not everyone likes to admit. For validation, and all, if not most of us want to feel important, to feel special and like we matter. We naturally take interest in those who are interested in and show appreciation towards us. Thus, we will accept the assumption here that the regular social media user also uses it similar to the narcissist. They both seek validation, but where they differ is in the level of validation they seek, and to the extent they go to get it. The question that should be looked at now is how much influence does social media have on those who are not considered to be narcissistic? Put differently, is social media creating a culture where it is pushing people to become more self-absorbed over time? And are people developing narcissistic tendencies they would not have developed anywhere else? These are certainly intriguing questions that do not have simple answers, or they still need further research, as many questions do. To try and answer these questions, it does indeed appear to be the case that a social media culture is emerging where self-expression is key to numerous individuals. Social media has become a form of self-expression, an outlet for individuals and groups to represent themselves. The problem with this manner of operation is that it presents a heavy temptation to showcase the best dimensions of oneself while downplaying the others. This temptation is so great that anyone can fall into it if they are not careful. So, it would appear that unless one is consciously aware of it, they may very well become more narcissistic over time, as well as be unaware of the fact that social media is responsible for that transformation. But what about the relationship between peers? How does a group of friends influence the individual? Well, if most or all of a person's friends utilize social media and post photos, it is more likely that person will also do the same, lest they feel excluded. People do not like to feel excluded from groups or other comparable dynamics, and so social media follows that same pattern. Peer influence to posts and create an online presence also does play a role, but it is still unclear. It is uncertain what role the environment plays compared to an individual's predispositions. And so here we are with another nature versus nurture debate. Go figure. And so the factors that influence social media presence once again may come down to a person's individual constitution, how much control they have over themselves, and how easily they are influenced by the opinions of others. To conclude this discussion, it would seem that there is a correlation between social media and narcissism. The strongest correlation being that people who are already narcissistic in disposition are drawn to social media because it enables them to act out their grandiose sense of self-promotion. As for whether social media creates narcissists from people who do not originally possess those qualities, that is not as obvious. However, there is a culture that has been created where self-promotion has become normalized and or accepted to some extent. As to how much influence this culture has on youth and individuals across the various age groups is yet again less clear. More research and inquiry is needed, and the conclusions are far from certain. Nevertheless, we as individuals need to be conscious of who we are, who we become, and whether it is positive or negative. Social media is a powerful tool, and if that tool falls into the wrong hands, then it can cause catastrophe. So, be aware of this tool and how you use it, because it could very well lead you down a path of self-destruction.